So Games Workshop have just published the new rules for Grandmaster Azrael. Let's see what the new datasheets for the Grandmaster of the Dark Angels can do in-game. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking about Games Workshop's new downloadable datasheet for Azrael. New rules to represent his new model in Primaris form, the one that's coming in that Vashtor Wrath of the Soulforged King box set that's coming this weekend. They did say that the rules will be available as digital downloads, as well as just in that box, and it seems that today they've come out with some. So far it's only available on their website as a downloadable thing. At time of recording they haven't announced it yet. I suspect that they will probably be following it up with an article very shortly after. In general I think they've done rather well with the new model. Azrael's got a bigger base and is sharing that with that Watcher in the Dark that bears the lion helm. They kept the very similar back banner and the styling that the model had previously. Perhaps the only major awkward looking bit is that combi plasma, which a few people aren't quite as much a fan of. In any case, let's take a look at his new rules and his updated stats. So the new datasheet for Grandmaster Azrael is 170 points. He was previously 140 before, so this is quite a significant points bump, but it does come with some better combat abilities. This one does appear to be very similar to that leaked datasheet that we had a fair while back, shortly after the model was revealed at Christmas, and for the most part I do feel like they've kept the flavour of the datasheet pretty much the same. Most of his special rules are unchanged. The main things that have been altered are some of his combat stats and his melee weapon. Azrael is of course an HQ choice for the Dark Angels army. He's got a stat line that you'd expect of a Space Marine Chapter Master, hits on 2s, strength and toughness 4, and he's now been upgraded to 7 wounds and 6 attacks with his new Primaris form, gaining 1 pip of each. Means he will have 7 attacks with Shock Assault, which is rather nice with his new upgraded Sword of Secrets, and he has Artificer Armor for a 2+ armor save, so he's a bit harder to kill than most. For war gear, he's got the standard bolt pistol and frag and crack grenades. His interesting combi plasma is called the Lion's Wrath, and despite a bit of a new appearance, it does appear to be the same stat line there. It's basically a combi plasma that fires at 24-inch range. The bolter bit is an extra AP -1 and damage 2 compared with normal, and the plasma bit is AP -4 and damage 2, and it never overheats and chips mortal wounds off him. As per normal with combi plasmas, if you fire both bits then you get -1 to hit, but it does mean that he's a little bit more threatening in the shooting phase than lots of similar characters. In reality though, I think that the Sword of Secrets is the more exciting bit. His melee attack will be typically 7 attacks at strength 7, AP -4 and damage 3, and each time you roll a 6 to wound, the enemy gets an additional mortal wound on top of this. It already had the mortal wound mechanic before, but the upgrades that it has is that it's gained a pip of strength. It was previously only strength 6, and it was previously only damage 2, so this really is a major boost. If he's fighting, say, Space Marine Terminators or something, then he's going to be cutting through them far more efficiently with damage 3, and strength 7 will really help out against anything that's toughness 6 or 7, say Custodian's jet bikes or a standard toughness 7 vehicle. Just in an average round of combat with no rerolls or any sort of other buffs, you'd be averaging around about 10 wounds to a toughness 7 vehicle with a 3+ save. Really not bad for a single character. Really though, while his stat line has been brought into line with the other Space Marine Chapter Masters, I still feel that perhaps the best thing about him are the buffs that he brings. He can hand out those 4 rerolls for Chapter Masters to either one core unit or one character unit, so he can use it on himself if he wants. Pretty great on anything that's a big core threat. Things like Ravenwing attack bikes or Deathwing Terminators with Thunderhammers come to mind. He's got the standard Captain rerolls, a 4+ invul save from his Iron Halo, the Inner Circle special rule, which means that he's only ever wounded on a 4+ like the rest of the Deathwing. That will certainly keep him safe. And then 3 other really helpful bits that are unique to his datasheet. The Lion Helm gives you a 6-inch aura of 4+ invuls for infantry and bikes. It's just invul saves against ranged attacks, but still that's a really powerful and quite unusual special rule. It means that anything with a 3+ armor save will like being near him quite a lot. His Supreme Tactician special rule means that if he happens to be your warlord, then your army gets an additional 2 command points, really quite a big selling point, and that makes up a significant chunk of his 170 point value right then and there. And then finally he's also got a Watcher in the Dark as well, a single once per game Desire the Witch power. If it happens to be a Chaos Psyker that's casting the power, then he gets to re-roll the dice for that as well, which is rather nice if you want to foil, say, a Chaos Space Marine Master of Possession. Otherwise, on the datasheets it's listed that he has to take Brilliant Strategist as his Warlord trait, as he did before. We'll come to that in a second, and the only other change is that he's gained the Primaris keyword on his keyword line. That is actually important for unlocking a couple of bits like Gene Wrought Might. That's the combat phase auto-wounding on 6's stratagem, but transhuman physiology won't be relevant on him, as he basically has it all the time from Inner Circle. Overall, Azrael's a really solid character and a good generalist, big rerolls, an interesting invul mechanic, some free command points, and some really quite solid damage and defensive stats for a character in combat. I feel like he's really going to be a terrible choice to have at the heart of a Dark Angel's battle line. Still though, whether or not this datasheet is actually better than the previous I think is up for debate really. It's certainly a far heftier melee threat against some targets, the extra attack and the damage 3 will be really meaningful against some things, but say if he's fighting 2 wound space marines or hordes or something, it hasn't really made the biggest difference in the world. The thing is though that for the better melee stats he is basically paying an extra 30 points for that, and while I think that will be points well spent against some foes, I think in some games that's going to be something that you probably would have been better just with a cheaper character for the buffs. I feel like perhaps his biggest value are in the combination of Chapter Master rerolls, 4+ invul saves, and command points. He hasn't really gained anything towards any of that by costing 30 points more, but he will be a better countercharge threat when he's in your battle line. I feel that overall in terms of power this is probably more of a side grade than a direct upgrade due to the increase in points cost. Still though, I certainly think he remains good for the points. It is kind of interesting to think about what kind of units can get the best out of his buffs. I'd say the 4+ invul save against range is perhaps the single most interesting thing about his datasheet. It's really quite a big special rule and potentially cuts high AP damage in half. It only affects infantry and bikes, so the ideal targets are usually going to be 3+ save units that are quite defensive or damaging already, and ideally stuff that doesn't already have its own invul saves to get maximum value out of it. Perhaps add more Green Wing flavour Dark Angels units, things like Aggressors, Eradicators, or Devastators would all be really nice with this. I feel like the Aggressors in particular would look very efficient with this. Pretty spectacular amounts of damage between their bolters and their power fists, good receivers of his rerolls, and their main issue is being pretty easy to kill with high strength anti-tank weapons with good AP. The 4+ invuls would help a lot. Perhaps the main issue with Aggressors, though, is they will be directly competing against things like Deathwing Terminators on the battle line. When you can get Thunderhammer and Storm Shield units that don't even need the invul buff for around about the same points cost, and they get permanent transhuman physiology baked in as well, they are maybe looking a little bit more questionable. I feel like you could probably justify one unit with Azrael though, and maybe keep Deathwing as more of the rest of the list. I do feel like it's kind of awkward that Deathwing and Ravenwing just aren't maybe ideal targets for his buffs at the moment. The Ravenwing already get Jinx, so they usually have invuls against range anyway. Deathwing get free Storm Shields these days. But still, I think you could probably still make an argument for attack bikes nosing into his invul aura, provided they're not trying to rush the enemy and get line of sight and everything. Then getting a 4+ invul save and not having to advance to get it is pretty excellent. It means that they can be a bit more accurate with those multi-melters rather than having to advance and take the -1 to hit penalty for them as per the Ravenwing Devastator doctrine. Otherwise, for his buffs and things, he's going to like anything that's core to give them reroll 1s to hit, and particularly big core units for the full rerolls. That's still going to be very relevant on things like the Ravenwing attack bites with the multi-melters, or the Deathwing Thunderhammer and Storm Shield Terminators. They only hit on 4s, so full rerolls is pretty excellent there. It's quite nice that that can happen in the command phase as well, so you could throw the rerolls on a Ravenwing unit and then have it move spectacularly far and shoot something without having to worry about moving out of buff range. In general, if you're running him, I would ideally want him to be the nominated Warlord as well. 2 command points for free is absolutely great, though I would say that Brilliant Strategist perhaps isn't quite as useful for all Dark Angels lists as it used to be. If you want to, you can now sit in Dark Angel's Devastator Doctrine all game long, and quite a lot of lists want to do that if they've got a fair bunch of Ravenwing along, zooming around the board and getting extra AP and extra movement. I guess if you're playing majority Deathwing and Assault units, it might well worth be progressing through the Doctrines to get to the Assault 1 turn 3. In that case, that could be really quite helpful for certain units to send them back to Tactical or Devastator. In Arcs of Omen, though, you certainly can nominate someone as your Warlord and not actually buy in their Warlord trait for the extra command point that it costs. So you could get the 2 CP for free, and then just use the extra Warlord trait stratagem to put traits and relics on other characters rather than Azrael. Going with all that, in general for how I'd want to field him would be trying to get him at the centre of the army, definitely buffing 1 or 2 really strong units with his rerolls, and ideally moving up alongside something that's going to benefit from that invul save as well. I'd say Dark Angel's troops, Gravis armoured Space Marines, Ravenwing attack bikes, or Deathwing all seem like pretty interesting choices to support, throwing big Chapter Master rerolls on 1 unit each turn, and trying to keep as many of the rest safe from other enemies. He seems like quite a nice option to have in a castle alongside other support choices, say Ezekiel for some good psychic powers with Enteromancy, or the Ravenwing Apothecary to get the Feel No Pain and healing where it needs to be. He could certainly make units pretty tanky between the apothecary and the imball saves. I think ideally he'd be wanting to move up toward midfield objectives and put some pressure on them. Then when the enemy engages the battle line, potentially try and countercharge them and put the Sword of Secrets to work. He is a pretty formidable combat character in his own right. I'd say perhaps his biggest issue for being played, though, is just how many other great choices there are within the Dark Angels army. They are a codex with just so many good choices that you can't take all of them, otherwise you'd be drawing a bit too much away from the raw threat on the battle line with the Deathwing and the Ravenwing. In current Dark Angels lists, both Talon Masters and Samael are both really quite popular, hovering around and putting out a decent amount of fire support, getting some full rerolls for Ravenwing as well. Ezekiel casts the Interromancy powers very well, handing out useful things like Fights Last or Stripping Auras or Obsec. Master Lazarus really isn't bad for some mortal wound defense on Deathwing Terminators. That can be pretty powerful when they're pretty durable against most other things. And just generic chaplains are pretty usable all the way around for Dark Angels, I think. Good buffs for Deathwing Assault, plus you could get Ravenwing Biker ones if you want, or interesting builds with the Interrogator chaplains, such as getting Teeth of Terror and Mantra of Strength on the go. There's even more support character conflicts in the Elite slot as well, the Deathwing Ancient for -1 damage on Terminator blocks, the Ravenwing Apothecary for healing and revivals of Terminators and attack bikes, and the Ravenwing Champion is a very fast and effective brawler for the cost. Compared with this little list of options, I'd say at 170 points, you are going to be facing some tough choices here. Do you want Azrael or say another Talon Master, or being able to include perhaps two of the cheaper ones of these? Currently for Dark Angels, at the new points cost and datasheet, I'd rate him as very usable, but not auto-include. Probably a good place for him, to be honest. Some lists could really build around him, but he's not going to be so good that every list needs to have him. Let me know your thoughts on the datasheet though. Is Azrael better or worse after these changes? Look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly try and keep the regular 40k videos coming. I'll be hoping to make a similar video like this for Vashtor whenever Games Workshop gets around to showing off his rules. If you'd like some more Unforgiven content to watch as well, I'll link my overview of Dark Angels and Arcs of Omen down in the video description. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.